Well, good afternoon and welcome again to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Paul Reed and I'm honored to serve as publisher of the Journal of Business. I'm also honored that each month so many of you choose to join us this time for some really great discussions about things going on in our community. You know, we started this special event 2.5 years ago, I think, because you asked us for a venue in which we could have important conversations about issues facing the business community. And we've had some fantastic guests in that time, including Stephanie Curran and Alex Jackson and Shelley O'Quinn, Tom Simpson, Steve Scranton, Larry Crowder, Vange Hawker, and so many others. Next month, we have Thane McCullough, president of Gonzaga University, for a discussion about the enrollment challenge. But today, we're very pleased to have with us Jason Thackston, Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy and Clean Energy Officer at Avista Corp, for a discussion about the future of energy. We are definitely in a changing energy landscape with focus on renewable resources, conservation, innovation, and changing future demand. What does that landscape look like from the perspective of our leading utility in our region? This should be a compelling conversation. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you again to please consider partnering with us to sponsor one of these events. We simply don't get to do these kinds of things without the support of some great community companies, and you've blessed us with that. So give that some thought. In the meantime, let's reacquaint ourselves with Elevating the Conversation. Take a look.
This is the time of year many of us look forward to. The longer days and warmer temperatures seem to bring out the best the inland Northwest has to offer. Whether you golf, boat, or just like to get outside, summer puts the quality and quality of life for many in the Pacific Northwest. From an economic standpoint, things aren't as cloudy as many thought they'd be at this stage. A hot jobs market is keeping a recession at bay, and inflationary pressures are easing. Even so, additional interest rate hikes appear to be in our future, and economists believe an economic slowdown is on the horizon. Fortunately, here in the inland Northwest, we aren't afraid of a little adversity. We are nothing if not resilient, resourceful, and perseverant. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed about what's happening in your community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with objective information on news and trends, with the goal of helping you be more successful on your chosen path. It's time to go beyond the sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for Elevating the Conversation.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're here in air-conditioned comfort, thanks in part to the work of Avista Corporation. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I think it's an important topic, and we've got a lot of ground to cover on it for sure.
Absolutely.
You know, I think the best place to start, you know, when we think about the future of energy, is kind of setting a baseline in terms of what are some of the narratives or philosophies that are guiding these conversations today.
Sure. Well, I think to start, I often talk about as a utility, what we are often thinking about is how do we merge in our decision-making process what is affordable. We think about affordability. We think about reliability, making sure that the lights come on and the air conditioning comes on when people want and need that. And we think about the environment and the environmental decisions that we make. So really trying to find that intersection of those three things. And so as we look to the future, I think there are two big buckets of ideas or work that we have going on that relate to the future of energy.
Sure.
The first is around how do we start, we're starting with a clean portfolio of generation resources already. More than 60% of our generation is already carbon free.
Sure.
But what steps can we take to make it even cleaner? And so there's a lot of work going on around both on the electric side and the natural gas side of our business on finding ways to create a cleaner portfolio of energy to serve our customers.
Sure.
The second bucket is around innovation and the grid of the future, and really looking for ways and being part of the solution to look for ways to engage with our customers differently in the future compared to the way that we have in the past, or the way that customers have engaged in their energy usage in the past. creating a smarter, more intelligent grid so that we can utilize the grid more efficiently, which is also beneficial from an environmental perspective.
Sure. So essentially what you're describing is generation and transmission, right? And so let's talk about generation first. When you talk about that 60%, could you give us an idea of what that mix is presently?
Sure. About half of our generation today is hydro generation. We were founded 134 years ago as a hydroelectric utility.
Washington Water Power.
Washington Water Power.
Of course, yeah.
We still have, a majority of our generation is hydro generation. And then we have some wind generation and some solar, and then a biomass facility up in Kettle Falls, north of Colville.
Sure, sure.
Those make up that roughly 65%, a little less than 65% of our generation. And then we have about a third of our generation is natural gas-fired generation. And then we have a partial ownership of a coal plant in Montana that we announced about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, that we're transitioning out of that by the end of 2025.
Right.
And so as we think about that, the future portfolio of generation, we established, about 4 years ago, we established a goal on the electric side to be 100% clean in our supply of electricity to our customers by 2045, and to be carbon neutral in our supply of electricity by the end of 27. And that's only 4 years away.
Right, right.
And so whenever I talk about those clean energy goals, I have 4 message points that go with it. It's always comes with when we talk about that goal. The first is that we will not sacrifice affordability and reliability in achieving those goals. If we believe that achieving those goals will cause undue hardship for our customers on their bills in terms of the affordability of our product for our customers, or if we put at risk the reliability of our grid, we're going to change those goals.
Right.
So they're aspirational goals. So affordability and reliability are always at the front of mind when we're making our decisions about generation.
Sure.
The second is that natural gas is an important part of our clean energy future. And I can talk some more about that if we have time, but today we can't just have a generation portfolio that's just hydro, just wind, and just solar, because our customers on the electric side use the most electricity, say 6 p.m. on a February night.
Sure.
And we know the sun's not shining.
Right.
Oftentimes those cold days in the winter that we all experience, the wind's not blowing much, and there's not a lot of water coming down the river because it's in the form of snow up in the mountains.
Right.
And so we need some source of generation that we can count on. And natural gas is the most efficient, cost-effective, and environmental resource available to be that backstop for all of that clean generation. The third thing I say is that we need technologies to mature and advance and drop in cost in order for us to achieve those goals.
Sure.
And I'll give you one example, battery storage.
Right.
Battery storage today on a utility scale is maybe 6 to 8 hours of storage capacity.
Not a lot.
And we need 60 to 80 hours. Yeah. And so we need to see that technology advance and mature in order for us to achieve the goals. And we're investing in some technologies to try to advance that work. But if that doesn't happen, then again, we need to adjust the goals.
Yeah.
And then finally, it's not just about generation. And so we've been involved with our customers, working with our customers on energy efficiency for more than 40 years.
Sure.
And we're also partnering with our customers on electric transportation, trying to find other solutions that are good choices for our customers, should they choose that, and also help clean up the portfolio of energy at the same time.
Sure. Well, lots of questions come out of that. Yeah. Let's start with hydro. You describe hydro as a clean energy. I would concur, of course. But where are we in the regulatory conversations in terms of hydro counting toward that mix that you're seeking, and also that to a degree you're required to do in the coming years? Right.
It is interesting that many years ago, when the Washington State passed the Renewable Portfolio Standard, that hydro generation didn't qualify as renewable. And so I think part of the conversation that's evolved over time is historically the focus has been more on what's renewable.
Sure.
And I think as we consider the challenges that we face as a society around climate change, it's more about what generation is greenhouse gas emission free.
Right.
And so that really changes the conversation. Instead of it's talking about whether it counts as renewable or not, talk about, is it greenhouse gas emission free? And hydro generation, clearly it has no emissions associated with the generation. And so whether it's considered renewable from a legal perspective or not, having that hydro generation as a significant part of not just Avista's portfolio generation, but the whole Northwest region, is contributing significantly to a clean portfolio of generation in support of the climate initiatives that we see all around us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So are regulators in concert with Avista on that, or are there still conversations going on?
At the state level, the regulators are very supportive of hydro generation because
great.
it's the most cost-effective resource we have to serve our customers.
Absolutely.
And so it's a great combination of no carbon emissions, no greenhouse gas emissions, and being a real cost-effective resource for our customers. Hydro generation is the reason that we have at Avista one of the lowest electric rates among investor-owned utilities in the nation, and why we as a state and as a region have a competitive advantage for attracting businesses here, because the energy costs are lower than a lot of other parts of the country. And it's largely because of a lot of foresight by people in this business 70 and 100 years ago
Sure.
to build the dams and create that generating capacity.
Sure, sure. So you brought up vehicles briefly. And I was at a conference in Detroit recently where there was someone from Cadillac talking about how they were going to completely electric cars by 2030. I don't think they're unique in that area where there's a lot of American auto manufacturers who are going that route. So just deviating a little bit off of what we talked about, what's going to happen with demand for your product, basically, in the coming years?
Well, there are two areas of growth on the demand side, on what we expect our customers to use in terms of electricity. The first is around electric transportation. And if we do see the adoption that the automakers are targeting and moving toward, and that some states have adopted in terms of goals, it's going to have a significant impact on our demand, on the demand that our customers have of us. And I think that there are two areas that affects. The first is what most people think about, just the obvious impact is we need to build more generation. And again, we can't just put all wind turbines and solar panels, because we need to be able to have that generation available when the customer plugs their car into their wall. But an often forgotten or overlooked area is all of the infrastructure to get that power from the generator to that customer's home or the business with the charging infrastructure. And with enough electric vehicle transportation or electric vehicle adoption, it's going to create some pressures and some stress on our grid that we'll need to invest in to accommodate that additional usage. So electric transportation is one. The other is electrification of buildings. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion going on here in Washington State, but also in Oregon and other parts of the country about a large-scale electrification push of the built environment. And we've done some analysis at Avista. Having both gas and electric customers, we have the information, the data, so that we can do the analysis on what the impact would be to the electric grid if all of our gas customers converted to electricity. And it creates some unintended consequences that we often talk about with policymakers and with the communities that we serve. The first is, just like with electric transportation, we have to build more generation or acquire more generation. And also the distribution infrastructure and transmission infrastructure to get that additional electric load to the customers' homes and businesses is critical on that side as well. What often is forgotten is what kind of investment the customer needs to make inside their home or their business to accommodate that additional load. Whether they have to upgrade their panels, change out their equipment, things like that. That's a cost that's not even factored into our analysis. But for our analysis, which is the generation and the transmission and distribution, our estimates are that a full electrification of the built environment would about double the customer's energy bill. So I'm an Avista gas and electric customer. My combined bill could double as a result of all of this investment that has to be made on the electric side to accommodate that additional load. And the usage by all of our customers would about double as well. And so again, it just creates this additional strain and stress on the grid that we'll need to invest and plan for.
Sure.
So it becomes really important when we're talking about electrification of the built environment, for example, and and some of the activities that are going on right now to talk about the pace of that change, the pace of those goals or mandates, to make sure that we're not creating a strain on the grid that can't be accommodated in a timely manner.
Sure. Well, that makes perfect sense. And then when you're talking about wind and solar, and I don't mean to sound like I'm disparaging those technologies by any stretch of the imagination, but you also see the added complication in some states where they're starting to preserve agricultural land that had been taken by these large wind or solar farms, which is there's just a lot of complexity to that conversation.
There are trade-offs. I often say there are trade-offs to every type of generation that's out there.
Sure.
There are pros and cons. With solar, once you have the panels installed, there's no fuel cost.
Right.
And same with wind. With solar, it displaces agriculture, and so that's a challenge. The wind turbines are able to be placed among farmland,
right.
and so that's helpful. But it still is these are competing interests that we all have to deal with as we think about the different types of generation to serve our customers.
Yeah, I can't believe we're already 20 minutes into this. Let me just say real quick. Please put your questions into the question and answer feature in Zoom, and here in another 10 minutes or so, we'll get to those and let Jason answer those for you. So let's talk about transmission real quick. You talked a little bit about innovation in that part of your world. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing with transmission.
Well, and it's really with the grid more broadly speaking.
Sure.
So we have in the University District here, not very far from where we are right now, on the south side of the tracks in South University District, we have two buildings that Avista partnered with many others to construct, and really seeing some really exciting things come to fruition through that work. And the first is inside the building called the Scott Morris Center for Energy Innovation. Scott Morris is the chair of our board. He was our CEO for many years.
Sure.
And he had this vision as the university district, as that bridge was being imagined, and this vacant set of properties were on the other side of the tracks there. He had this vision to create the 5 smartest blocks in the world. And that is very aspirational.
Sure.
And it's fun to see a lot of that come to fruition over the last few years. So inside the Morris Center for Energy Innovation, we have an energy plant that's actually providing the energy for the Catalyst building, which is next door.
Okay.
And the really exciting part about the Morris Center for Energy Innovation is that we also have a lab there. We call it the Innovation Lab.
Sure.
It's a real-time grid simulator. And we have the ability to experiment with different interactions among different components that are on a grid. So in that lab, we have some solar panels, we have a battery outside the building, we have the ability to experiment with different ways of working those components together to find an efficient way to operate the grid.
Sure.
And then we can plug and play other ideas that are coming out of some of these innovative companies that we interact with in the national labs, and the universities, McKinstry, and others that are partnering with us on many of these projects that we have.
Sure.
We have a grant from the Department of Energy. We were one of 10 recipients in the nation called Connected Communities. And what we're doing there is using that lab and partnering with others on a pretty large swath of downtown Spokane that includes commercial businesses, residential customers, some low-income portions of our community, and we're over a few years, we're going to be partnering with our customers in different ways to see how we can have them come along with us in this journey toward a cleaner energy future and a smarter grid. Give them information about energy usage and see how that affects their planned usage of the energy, for example. So we're really trying to think transition from what historically was kind of a one-way flow of electricity. The large-scale power plants, we generate the power, we'd send it out to our customers. And now we have this bidirectional flow and communication going on between us and our customers,
Right.
hopefully resulting in a more efficient grid and a more informed customer who can then make decisions about their energy usage that they couldn't make before.
Sure, sure. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm not trying to be obsequious by going down this path, but it's fact that Washington Water Power and now Avista had a history of technology spin-offs. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Itron started as a spin-off of Washington Water Power. And so when you talk about that, I wonder if there are going to be those types of opportunities out of the things that you're doing now.
Oh, I believe so.
Okay.
Innovation remains it's a core value of our company, and that is because, I'm not going to get the quote right, so I'm not going to try it, but there's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, and that's more about leadership, but it applies in the business sense as well. We can be successful for the last 134 years in delivering low-cost electricity and natural gas to our customers.
Sure.
But we're seeing an evolving industry, and we're seeing customers want to have more participation in their energy decisions. And so we want to, we think a lot about innovation and trying to figure out how we can be proactive in planning for that future. And so we really encourage innovation as part of our mindset with our employees. And what will come out of that, who knows? But Itron's a great example. That was Washington Water Power employees who said there's got to be a better way to keep track of our customers' usage month by month and not be as manual as it was before. And it ended up getting to the smart meter company that Itron is today, and they're doing great. And we have conversations like that all the time inside our company of trying to understand the problems and then having conversations about how we might solve those. And if a business idea comes out of it, we want to encourage that. And we really do nurture those opportunities and see if something can come to fruition.
Sure. You brought up affordability a few times, and one of the things, and since we're talking about technology, one of the things I've wondered about is for years we've been hearing, and I think Itron has had this technology, probably you too, to have more dynamic rates to where if you're using energy at a certain time of day, for example, your rate is lower than if you're using it at a heavier load time. Is that sort of intelligent approach something that is close or something that you talk about introducing to your customers?
That's a great question, and there are parts of the country that do have time of use rates, and we don't, because historically there wasn't a large differential between the daytime cost for power and the nighttime cost for power. Now we're seeing a lot more variability in those prices, and so we're having conversations about what that could look like in terms of different rate structures to help our customers. A good example is, especially with electric transportation, most people who have electric cars, they come home after work, they plug their car in, and it just starts charging. Well, at 6 p.m. on a summer day, like when it's as hot as it is out here, is probably not a good time to be adding load to the grid.
Sure.
And if we can provide them with information that, hey, if you wait until midnight, and you don't have to stay up until midnight to plug it in, we have the technology and the intelligence and the technology to say, okay, you can plug your car in when you get home, but it won't start charging until midnight, for example. So we're talking through opportunities like that can help balance out the strains and stresses on the grid more broadly that we're seeing across the western U.S. and across the country. And so that can be a pricing mechanism. It can be some type of incentive mechanism where if you use the power to charge your car in the middle of the night, maybe you get a lower rate as a result. So we're talking about those things.
Okay, it's interesting conversations, it sounds like. And that kind of leads into another question I had, which was consumer behavior. At some point there's going to have to be some education, as there was back in the day, of insulating water heaters and that sort of thing. What do those kinds of conversations look like?
Well, that's a lot of what we're focused on in this Connected Communities grant and program that I talked about. Because historically, there are some customers who are very, very excited about seeing the usage they had and changing out light bulbs and doing everything they can. Every little bit helps. And then there are other customers who just pay the bill and don't really pay attention to what their usage is. And so through this Connected Communities program, we're identifying some use cases, some different ways that we can engage with our customers. Say, does this type of communication help you, or is it just a nuisance? And is this kind of information helpful, or is it just a nuisance? And then that will allow us to figure out what kind of programs we can put in place to cater to the different types of customers that are out there. Historically, utilities have thought about their customers as residential customers, commercial customers, and industrial customers. And we've learned a lot over the 10, 20 years recently that we know that our customers are all unique. We have some who really care about their energy usage and are tracking it every day. Now that we have smart meters here in Washington State, they're tracking it regularly, and we have others that don't. And so we want to make sure that we're catering to the interests of those different types of customers, instead of residential, commercial, and industrial customers. The customer that has this kind of an interest around energy usage, and this customer that really doesn't, but just wants to see a bill flat over a year, for example.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
So we're learning a lot.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen with rates over the next 5 to 10 years? Because everything you're talking about, and we had a story not too long ago about the really hundreds of millions in investment you're making annually.
Right.
And so I know affordability is an emphasis, but these things cost money. And so what do you think will happen to rates, and will it get to a point where it affects competitiveness?
Well, there are a lot of pressures from the cost side that you referenced. There are some laws that have been passed around cap and trade and the Climate Commitment Act that are creating some pressures from a cost perspective. Inflation has been a concern, particularly over the last couple of years, and the related supply chain. We're seeing some costs that are coming down. The wind project that we brought into service at the end of 2020 was much less in terms of the cost of that wind power compared to the first project that we put into service in 2012.
That makes sense.
So we're seeing some cost decline, and we're also trying to take advantage of some of the federal tax dollars that are available through the Infrastructure Jobs Act, IIJA, and the Inflation Reduction Act that was more recently passed. We have several proposals in with the federal government, which would help offset some of the costs, those hundreds of millions of dollars you referenced, would help offset some of those costs, which is a benefit for our customers. So I'm not avoiding your question. I'm just saying there are a lot of factors, and so it's hard to imagine a scenario where energy prices are going to go down in the future.
Right.
And so our focus is really trying to figure out how do we bend down that curve of the prices as much as possible. So we have things, we have a business process improvement discipline inside our organization, really trying to find ways to be more efficient in the way that we do the work, which helps from a cost perspective. We have a business transformation effort that has been underway for the last few years in particular, which is looking at all kinds of things that we can do. One example is just, there's a lot around automation, and certainly AI is a topic of interest for a lot of people these days, and artificial intelligence and chat GPT. Those are things that we're having conversations about. How can we incorporate those into our business in ways that will bend down that cost curve so that these other pressures that we're experiencing don't have as much of an impact on our customers. I don't know if you're familiar with the term ALICE. ALICE customers, ALICE is asset limited, income constrained, but employed. And the United Way has done a lot of work across the country around this title of ALICE. And I don't know the exact percentage, but around 40% of our customers qualify as ALICE customers or below in terms of their income. And so we really take seriously, we talk a lot about the impact of the decisions that we make on our customers' bills, because even if it's $5 a month, to some that may not feel like much, it's a cup of coffee, but to some it's significant, and they're having to make decisions around that. So we want to acknowledge these pressures that we're seeing that I talked about, but we also want to look for ways to stem down the tide of those pressures through offsets wherever we can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Fascinating conversation. Why don't we see if there are any questions from our viewers at this point?
Yes, we have a couple. First one, actually some statements and a request. How's that? But thanks for the engagement, David. David says, you quickly shut down a discussion of battery storage, 6 to 8 hours. First, it's more than that. Second, when you save during the day for peak use evening hours, that significantly helps. Third, home battery storage can be longer, and it seems that utility companies are fighting NEM so you don't have to pay for supply when needed. Please address batteries with a bit more depth.
Well, I'm sorry if I came across as shutting it down. I'm actually really excited about energy storage more broadly, not just batteries. I referenced that we have invested in some companies around clean energy technology. And I'll give you an example. We have an investment in a fund that invests in emerging clean energy technology companies. And one example is a company called Form Energy, which is a utility scale iron oxide battery technology. And I can't get any deeper in that because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist, but it's really interesting. And they just announced 2 pilot projects, large-scale pilot projects with a utility out of Colorado called Xcel Energy. We have an investment in that company through this fund because we want to see energy storage more broadly and battery storage advance. On a utility scale, cost-effective energy storage is not available for 60 or 80 hours of storage. There might be some examples, but they're not cost-effective yet. We want to see those costs come down. We want to see that technology mature because it would be great to put that battery technology alongside wind or solar projects so that we can take advantage of those times when we're generating excess power above what our customers are using and draw it down. But again, in the middle of the night on a February night, 6 p.m. on a February night, we can't count on the sun having been shining earlier in the day to build the capacity of the battery to draw it down that night. We really need multiple days of generating capacity. And I think we'll get there. It's just a question of what that pace is.
And a question from Chris. What are you planning for the Kettle Falls plant? Will it use syngas from plasma gasification? Will the excess heat and steam produced be available for use by industrial customers or for local heating and cooling?
I'm really excited about Kettle Falls. Kettle Falls was the first utility scale biomass facility in the nation when it came online in the mid-1980s. And it's still generating electricity today and has a great future. And we're actually in conversations with a company that would help with some of the waste that comes out of Kettle Falls and to repurpose it in a way that would be really beneficial from an environmental perspective. Kettle Falls, as Chris may know, because he knows about Kettle Falls, it's not located in a very urban area of our state. So when we talk about some type of heating district, that's not really something that we've considered. But we are looking at ways to make that plant even more productive than it is today. The limitation there, just for those of you who don't know what Kettle Falls is, Kettle Falls, it's north of Colville. It takes the wood waste from lumber mills across eastern and northeastern Washington and southern Canada. And historically, what would happen at those lumber mills is they would just burn their waste in a pile at the site of the lumber mill, create all of this air quality problems, pollution, and it was just wasteful. And we take that now and they break it down into bark-sized chips, and we generate electricity through a steam turbine at Kettle Falls. So it's a great, it's part of this, my kids make fun of me for saying the circle of life too often, but it is part of this circle of life that we live in here in the Pacific Northwest. We rely on the lumber industry, and to be able to take the waste from those lumber mills and generate clean electricity with it, it's just a really exciting plant. It doesn't generate a ton of electricity. It's 50 megawatts out of about 1,000 megawatts of generating capacity for our whole system, but it's an important part that we really appreciate.
Well, that's all the questions we have, but let me ask one myself. How was that, Jason? So I had the chance to tour the nuclear plant out of Richland this springtime, Northwest Energy, and it made me wonder, what's the mood now for nuclear power as an electricity source? Will we warm back up to that, or is it going to stay the way it's at? What's the landscape look like?
I think there are a lot of exciting things happening in the nuclear energy space right now. You may have seen there was news just yesterday, I think, coming out of Energy Northwest, which is in the Tri-Cities, about some small modular nuclear reactor projects that they're pursuing. Historically, the challenge with nuclear, even though it's a very safe source of generation, we have a couple of examples that really stick in people's minds about the safety. That's one issue. The bigger issue for us historically has been that we're not a large enough utility to build our own nuclear reactor. That's a large project. There's one that just came online in the Southeast with one of the largest utilities in the nation, and that project was billions of dollars over budget and years over the timeline. We can't afford that for our customers. Our customers can't afford that. More recently, there's this concept of small modular nuclear reactors. Again, a non-engineered description of it is it's basically a containerized, much smaller, kind of stackable or connectable bite-sized chunks of nuclear generation. That doesn't have the same waste issues as traditional nuclear generation does. And so there are some pilot projects going on. We're not part of any right now, but I'm watching, and we are watching with interest to see how that evolves. And in many ways, it could be a solution that a lot of the energy companies are looking for, in that it doesn't emit greenhouse gas emissions and it's reliable. So getting back to where I started, this intersection of what's clean, affordable, and reliable, if they can make that nuclear generation affordable, it checks the other boxes quite well.
Well, Jason, thanks so much for your time today. Fascinating conversation.
Pleasure.
Bet we could go for another 45 if we wanted to.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you stay cool. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and join us again at the end of August when Thane McCullough will join us to talk about higher education and the challenges that sector faces. Have a good evening, and thanks for reading the journal.